Good evening, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. And I'd ask if anybody's recording, they make it known. Thank you. There's agendas on the front table, if anyone needs one. The first item of business is approve the minutes of August 27th. I don't know if the board's had time to review them, if they're ready to act. There's a question on something that I saw. Regarding those dimensional standards, you mentions, Charlie, that you said it was well-written. Is that
What are we talking about?
on the discussion on Article 6, Table 628, tables for dimensional standards for existing small lots? Like the second sentence says, Mr. Rowley feels this is written well. Seemed to me you said the opposite, but you recall?
Oh,
I think you were talking about it's not fitting into the radius.
I'm not seeing that language at all. Where'd that say?
I don't see that.
Page 3,
Is this where she said in her emails, minutes aren't, there was a lot of discussion? Something missing from this,
I missed that because I was without email for.
the email from Jasmine?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't recall it, George.
Sorry.
I might be confusing it with the next sentence where you were talking about building height, but.
Mr. Chairman, the discussion about the height from, going from 20 feet to 25 feet, building height, centered about the definition of how height is defined, how
Mhm.
it's determined. I think that was left open. I think my memory could be failing me, but it wasn't a closed discussion about going to 25 feet. If the means of determining building height were altered back to the old version of the zoning code.
We get any clarification on that, just as a side note?
There was discussion on the definition of building height as well. We could add that in.
Mm-hmm. So would you say adding, depending on how height is defined, would be accurate?
We left it open to further discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you said Mr. Deskalakis questioned the definition of building height,
Yep, that's fine.
Fine.
You wanna rewrite it or just pencil it in?
pencil it in. Any other additions or corrections? I get a motion to approve as corrected.
I move to accept the minutes as corrected.
Second?
205. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. The next two items were just a formality to sign the sign a form that on items we previously approved. So the next item up is a approval not required plan for Edward and Lauren Kinsman, 65 Jefferson Shores Road.
Sit down.
Yeah, go ahead. Sit down.
Is this one?
There's multiple copies.
You'd identify yourself and give us a description of what you're...
Yep, my name is Edward Kinsman. I have a home at 65 Jefferson Shores Road in East Wareham. My neighbor has a lot between us, approximately, I think it's probably about 50 feet. And our position is that we like to purchase approximately 40 feet from him. He's agreed to it. We have a purchase and sales agreement. and we're looking to close hopefully next Monday. So my lot will go from 60-foot frontage to about 90.
The present was north. The current west lot of your property will then be eliminated, correct? The current west line, lot line?
Yeah, it's just going to incorporate the lot next to mine.
Was that piece created or left to provide access to the water for,
On the opposite side of my home is a right-of-way for the other residents in the community to walk, access to the beach. So there's a right-of-way right there.
Does another plan get filed without that lot line showing, just in terms of documentation? Because right now, the plan we're looking to not give our approval to shows a line.
less conforming, one more conforming?
Yeah. By application of the law, it becomes one parcel. It's a non-buildable parcel otherwise. It's part of the, and the building commissioner would consider it as part of the,
I'm just asking, what happens to this lot line that we're seeing? It stays?
it stays. If it's get filed on the land record, it stays.
Okay.
So that parcel exists today.
Right, it's all virgin land, so it's never been built on. There's no utilities there, no structures. It's just basically moving the lot line so we have more frontage.
Is your intention to expand on,
Not at this time. I don't foresee that in the near future at all. It's a weekend home, so I don't see that happening.
So that parcel does exist today, and you're just changing ownership, or you're creating?
No, it's too small for an individual lot, because a number of years ago, the previous owner put a garage on it. So he purchased a lot between the two homes, which is a normal 60 by 120. But he wanted to maintain a 10-foot setback, so he bought the parcel between our homes. So now that lot was really only, I think it's probably like 50 feet. So we're looking to purchase, I think on the plans, it shows 35 feet. So he'll remain a 16-foot setback off his garage, and then we'll purchase the remainder of the lot up to my property line.
Oh, so you're not showing the
Okay, so that lot line was further over to the left originally. You see it?
Yeah, it's just shifting the lot line.
I'm not seeing it.
Well, it's not shown on the plan. They added a garage onto 67.
Right.
So in other
To
words,
maintain the 10-foot setback. He had to buy the lot to
so
put the
that
garage
parcel
up.
before was what, 50-foot frontage before?
I thought it was 60. I think in Justin Shores, they're all 60-foot frontage.
Okay, I got you.
Mhm.
Okay. Make a motion to endorse the Form A as presented.
Second?
You second? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? I'm gonna sign this one.
Yeah,
You
okay,
got the Mylar?
yeah.
I just one.
Can't get it open.
So the right-of-way he's talking about is here?
That's,
This is the piece of property he's talking about.
yeah, yeah. And the right of way is there.
Yeah, off to the side, okay. So by,
Yeah,
by,
yeah.
by taking that, he's not restricting anybody from
No,
getting
no,
to
no,
the...
my only question is, that
Listen
I
on
don't,
this,
I
you need to have
don't
this registered.
make an issue of it. This line shouldn't be there. Once he acquires this, this should be dashed, right, and identify this lot line to be abandoned.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
She may be able to, we overnight it to her, she may be able to take care of it before the closing this week.
Wrong date, sorry. How many, just one?
I have another one.
Is it two or one? One?
That's one.
That's all you need?
All you need is the Mylar, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we have an approval not required plan for Kate Benton, 85 Towhee Road. That one's in color.
Mylar's down here someplace.
There's the Mylar.
You can
Yeah,
share
well,
this. This is my neighbor. This is already an easement.
Explain
They
this.
want to make it a
I'm gonna
right of
handle
way.
it.
They own both lots. No, this is Michelle, this is Michelle. But anyway, they're gonna switch this to a right of way from an easement.
What you got going on?
This creates the parcel 3C, which is an easement,
So about to come in right away.
and splits it off from the parcel.
Yeah, because they want to
So
sell
it's
this lot.
splitting it off from lot 3A
So by having it right away.
3A.
and creating its own.
So what's the purpose of this right away? What does it lead to?
It's a beach.
Oh, to the water, okay.
Do you know anything about this one?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Bob Rogers, GAF Engineering. I did not specifically go over this plan today with Jeff. He had told me about it, but I didn't know that it was going to be endorsed tonight. But I believe it's just a resolution of some access. So
The access easement.
no new buildable parcels. I guess we're just creating an access easement.
Questions?
And they're doing this to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the actual lot that would be
So that's
selling?
that's an existing wood road in there now, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Who's gonna own it?
I would look at the notes on the purpose of the plan notes. So I believe it's current either neighbor or the people that use it now.
I don't see any notes as to,
There's no purpose of the plan? I
well, I
apologize.
don't see any transfer of ownership. I just see it delineating the,
Okay. Can I steal one copy from you? So if we go to the notes, so parcel 3C has been created to separate the existing 30-foot wide right-of-way from lot 3A. No alteration of the rights of others to use the existing right-of-way are made. And then note 2, parcel 3C shown hereon is not to be considered as a separate building lot, but is intended to be maintained as a right-of-way. So I believe this just establishes, you know, what's already been taking place, you know, in terms of the use of that existing Woods Road to get to the water.
say, I don't see a change in ownership, just delineation of the right-of-way.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, it's basically notes 1 through 5 is the intent of the plan.
Would this then entitle these property owners to deed their properties with water rights?
It doesn't change, it was, people have rights across this particular piece, they're just separating it from the lot. No rights have been impinged upon or changed.
So whereas before it was an easement, now it is a 30-foot strip of ownership.
Owned by the same people with the easement still in place, rights of access.
That's my understanding.
The only question I have, Mr. Rogers, is who owns the right? Does it have to have an owner? For insurance purposes, I mean, if someone breaks a leg walking on it, who do they sue?
Yeah, that's
Cur-
beyond my...
Currently, it's in the same ownership, as
So
far as I can...
Benton still owns it?
Yeah,
It doesn't,
that's what the plan
Yeah.
demonstrates.
On lot,
And clearly, it's dividing the access from that beach and groin access area. So, parcel 3D is a newly created non-building parcel just for the beach and groin area. So
when
that's-
it was a right-of-way, it belonged to Kate Benton, right? And now that it becomes when it was an easement, it belonged to the Benton property. So
Yes.
do they continue to own the right-of-way? That's the only question I have. And does it matter?
Yeah, all of this is talking about maintenance, and so there's no language on this plan about conveyance.
about B3, does B3 have any rights on that road?
Say that again, please, Mike.
Lot B3, the one to the left of the beach groin area. There's two separate lots here. You got
Yes,
B2
yeah,
and
the
B3.
Brewsters,
Right.
correct. Yeah, they also, so they have B2 and B3, so obviously they're the ones using that access currently, and I would assume in the future. So this is a plan that's been worked out between the Bentons and the Brewsters.
I don't see nothing referred to the notes in here stating that. Or am I missing it?
Well, I mean, we're working for Kate Benton, certainly. And so we've created 3C as a 30-foot right-of-way, 3D. For whatever reason, they wanted to create the 30-foot wide right-of-way as an ownership parcel, and so it's notes 1 through 5 for 3C and 3D.
There's no dwelling on B3 right now, right? That's just a lot.
The only dwelling I see is on 3A. It's going by the locus. So it's not depicted on the plan, it's shown in the locus.
Like creating this right away, does that?
You want Kay to make a motion?
Orange, this lot,
The frontage is right here.
strictly on this road. Still a non-buildable lot. So it's still a non-buildable lot.
This has a house on it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for the approval of the A and R
They used to use these.
as illustrated on drawing
It's one family.
1 of 1.
Motion to endorse, yep.
Front. Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
I,
Opposed? Abstained?
House is here.
now does this create a buildable lot?
No,
There's the one.
doesn't have any frontage. Doesn't have any frontage.
This one.
That's fine.
This is part of the other one. Say, it's got a Existing non-conforming.
So this one will.
You gotta do it, ain't it? Rubber band.
It's existing but non-conforming, so many.
Next, we have the continued public hearing for Wareham House 2 LLC, 33 Blackmore Pond Road.
Approach the board, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Is it on? Did you find a little button?
From the handheld part?
Yeah.
Try to sing a Bee Gees song.
It looks like shit, huh?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, my name is Joe Shanahan. I'm Director of Real Estate Permitting for Clean Energy Collective, which is the parent company of the applicant this evening, Wareham MA2 LLC. With me this evening is our Vice President of Development, Mark Nelson, and also our engineering consultant of record, Bob Rogers from GAF Engineering. Quite candidly, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm relatively new to this project, but I am not new to the town of Wareham. I've previously permitted 2 projects in your community, have worked very well with Mr. Buckland and other officials in the town in connection with those projects. And I'm pleased to say, I think we're considered very good corporate neighbors here. We have a good relationship with your town manager and other town officials. As I inherited this project, if you will, recently, I kind of walked through it line by line and date by date since the process has begun. It appears to me, and I'm looking for your feedback on it this evening as well as Mr. Buckland's, but at this point, it appears to me that what we've submitted to the board has crossed the Ts and dotted the Is on the bylaw requirements for a ground-mounted facility of this type. I recognize that there is one remaining and not insignificant issue to be addressed, and that is the visual impact / landscape screening of this project. I visited the project earlier today to reinforce what I had already seen on the plans. And while there are other residential properties in the area, the main concern with regard to visual impact for us and for the neighbors are these 2 homes here, which front on the same way as our entrance to here. Call them a butter 1 and a butter number 2. I spoke earlier in the hall with Mr. Powers, who was a butter 2, about his concerns with regard to the visual impact. I showed him on this visual simulation, and we have a number of them that we've done in order to get a feel for what the current conditions are, what the current visuals are, and what the impact of the project would have. And quite candidly, as I pointed out to him, looking at his driveway from his site, while he's not looking directly into the entrance to our property, there is a gate at this particular location with the access drive, and at the right angle from his property, that gate is visible. So what I spoke to him initially about was there are certain things we can do in connection with our project on our property site. There are other things we may be able to do to lessen the impact, improve his perspective, one of which I discussed with him is us incurring whatever costs may be deemed reasonable for there to be some plantings added in this area that would in fact cut off the angle 80% of our projects. Federal electrical code requires it to be 7 feet tall. We're up another 6 inches because most conservation commissions and those concerned with the habitat like to know that the existing wildlife can improve the project by going under the fence across and out again. So that's what we generally do. But again, that's in 80% of our projects. Certain of our projects are a little closer to people with a view. We take a different approach. Mr. Powers suggested, why can't you get rid of the stainless steel or galvanized chain link fence and go to something that's black coated, that'll tie in, green plated. We prefer not to go with the green plate because it deteriorates over a period of time, but we have on a number of projects gone to black chain link. The other thing which I think he prefers, and I can understand why, he and others apparently visited a project in Rochester with a fence across the front of the property, a wooden fence with decorative plantings in front of the fence to kind of break it up. He indicated by going that route, even in the wintertime when the leaves are off some of the shrubbery and the screening, you've still got something that's attractive and is between the project and people living here and driving up and down the street. I'm very, very confident that over the next week or two, we can work something out with the neighbors, sit down, maybe visit the Rochester site with them, work out something that will be acceptable to them in the manner of a landscape/fence screening along this area of their concern and alleviate that particular problem. The other issue that Mr. Powers raised, and I think it's been raised before you, is there is another project up the street. Quite honestly, I permitted it. The project was sold to another entity. I drove by there today. He's correct. There hasn't been the maintenance of the landscaping that there should have been at that particular site. But back to the fact, we consider ourselves to be good corporate neighbors. We don't just come in and do a project and let it go. We've got very good record and well over 40 projects that we've done here in Massachusetts. What has happened up the street shouldn't have happened. I'm not going to opine on whether the town has the teeth to go out and do something about it, but I'm familiar with permitting for that site, and that isn't what was expected when the town allowed that project to be built. I would indicate to you on this location, because of those concerns, I don't expect you or Mr. Powers or his neighbors to believe me. I'm kind of self-serving standing up here on behalf of CEC. But you need to know that we will, in fact, maintain that landscaping as it's proposed to this board. And in order to do that, what I had suggested, and I would offer up to the board as a condition, if and when you approve the project, is we would post a bond with the town with the condition that you pick a time, a year out, 18 months out, 2 years from now. The board goes out and reviews the landscaping that we proposed and we planted. And if at that time you look and say, we've got 7 arborvitaes, they're not looking too healthy, we want you to replace them. And at the same time, you look and say, you know, even as they're filling out, we think you could use a little more density in terms of your landscaping. We'd like you to enhance your landscape plan. What I would suggest to you is we would post a bond, probably in the amount of $20,000. That bond would basically ensure the following. You come out, tell us we need to do it. If we or anyone else says to you, we're not going to do it, the town has the funds to go out and take care of it and pay for it itself. It's very synonymous with the decommissioning bonds that we post here and in every other town. That's a removal and restoration bond. And what that bond does is, in the event we or anyone else ever abandon that project, anytime that would happen, you take what is there because there's an enormous salvage value to it. But in the event that we or someone else abandoned the project and did not do anything with the project, the town would have a bond in a sufficient amount to go in, have it removed, have the site restored to its former condition, not at your expense, at our expense. That is there. The amount that's agreed upon is agreed upon permitting, but it's usually reviewed every 3 to 5 years. As you'd imagine, the cost doesn't go down, it always goes up. So every 3 to 5 years, we increase the amount of the bond for decommissioning in order that you are always guaranteed the financial surety to make sure that happens. We do that not only for the town, but obviously the landlord from whom we lease the property wants to make sure that would happen also. So that is how we're looking at the visual impact and the landscape screening. Obviously, as I've indicated, I think we need a little more time to work with the neighbors. I'm confident we can get to where they can be satisfied and that we can present something that you can be comfortable with. Quite candidly, I'm new to the project, but at the same time, I don't want to waste their time, your time, and my time. So I'd like to get some feel from the board, number one, of am I correct? Is this the chief issue you're most concerned about at this time? And if so, absent that issue, presuming it can be resolved, is the board of a mind that this project can go forward? Because I don't want to go out and make promises to neighbors that are never going to come to be. With that, Mr. Chairman, may I inquire of you and the board as to where you see us and where you'd like us to go before the next meeting?
Well, in another project similar to this, with proximity to residences, the abutters welcomed the project with some similar changes. They would rather have had the solar project than the 6 or 7 lot subdivision that was approved for the same site. This particular project was different. It didn't get that welcome feeling from the abutters, and I think that's your biggest obstacle to overcome. The fact that you're talking with them is a positive point.
That's the way to do business. May I ask which project you're talking about?
I don't know the name of it offhand. It's off of County Road.
416.
418 County. 418 County.
418 County.
Because I would indicate to you, I did the permitting for 6 Beaver Creek Lane, and as Mr. Buckland will recall, by the time we get through the process, all of the neighbors on the street were supporting the project. One particular neighbor, much like Mr. Powers, reasonable man with reasonable requests, Paul Willard. I sat with Mr. Willard, we walked through his concerns, we addressed them, resolved them, and everything's going well over there. I think the same can happen here.
I think one of the neighbors moved out of town as a result of the project being built next to them,
Which project?
the one on Beaver Creek.
That can happen.
What's being addressed about the service line, you know, we kind of implied, we'd like to see it underground. The first one should have been underground, one across the street. They got a massive poles going overhead, and overhead wires unsightly. We're gonna cut a 20-foot swath from there all the way up to the main road. Is that gonna go underground now, or?
We're required to have 4 utilities. That's not our decision. It's the utility that tells us for our equipment, we need to install 4 utility poles.
But they're,
Anything other than that, we can go under.
but their clear cut's gonna be 20-foot wide all the way up?
I guess the question is, has there been any progress made with using the poles on Squirrel Island Road?
We're not opposed to using
Well, I thought that's what was represented last time, that was if you were able to get access to those poles, that would be the route taken.
It's been explored, but at this point, I can't
Okay.
commit that to the board.
Could you talk about this view from this lower home down here? So
May I?
I'd like to talk about this homeowner's view of this solar field, particularly the elevation change and how much of that field they're going to see.
Tell you one thing, these places are very deceiving.
I'd respectfully suggest we get down here,
Plus it looks like it's all
almost
rich.
based on existing vegetation. That's not a visual impact of great concern. I don't know whether the property owner is here or has been here in the past, but you've got quite a bit of distance, and you've got very much a natural vegetated screening along that area. If they come forward as part of our discussions with the neighborhood, and it has to be beefed goofed up in any way, we're happy to address it.
Well, I think my perception, looking from that homeowner's property and from the drawings, I think there's a 35-plus foot elevation change. And because of how the house is situated, they're going to see the better part of that. The only way you're going to correct this is to build about a 35-foot berm and then vegetation on top of that. Otherwise, they're going to have a bird's eye view of the entire
Not this house
farm.
here, it's actually south.
Excuse me? So the house that you're referring to is the Barrows house, I believe?
Correct.
So it's not this house over here, it's actually one to the south right here. And there is some natural vegetation here. I think that what we had talked with Mr. Barrows about in the past, excuse me, I'm mispronouncing his name. Excuse me, oh yeah, but I'm Mark Nelson with Clean Energy Collective, I'm the Vice President of Project Development. What we talked to Mr. Barrows about was that we'd be willing to put in some type of arborvitaes on the south side of our array to provide a natural screen for him. And I do understand that there will be some visual impact while those arborvitaes are growing up, but those, once again, and I've got them in my yard and they're about 25 feet tall. We agree that we'd be willing to put in some additional vegetative barrier here to help shield the view for him.
How long does it take to get to 25 feet?
They go in, I think they grow something like 3 feet, 2 to 3 feet per year. So, you know, it's probably going to take them 5 years before they actually get to the height that's going to actually obstruct the whole view.
The problem we have with any project, and I don't care whether it's a solar project or a self-storage facility or anything that takes up a large tract of land, there's only so much you can do to screen from higher elevations. I have 2 projects in North Adams that are below the Mohawk Trail. There's no way you can screen those projects from a view from the Mohawk Trail other than putting a roof over them, which I think is self-explanatory. You can't do that. Your bylaw does not provide that the project is invisible to the public. That's not the standard. The standard is that we do what is reasonably necessary to lessen the impact to abutting property owners. And I think we're trying to do that. I'm indicating to the board over the next several weeks we'll pursue that further. But there is admittedly only so much you can do.
Thank you. May I? I appreciate your comments, but we still don't have enough information in order to base a decision. I had asked for site sections to be taken through, and I had asked to see the elevations of the abutting houses so that a site section a real view can be seen. It's not here, unless you have it there.
No, I don't.
You don't. So, you've said a lot, it's appreciated, but we're still in ground zero as far as I'm concerned, because I am not able, in good conscience, to evaluate the impact on the neighbors unless we see a true cross-section at several points along the site.
I appreciate
Thank
your input, and that's why I'm here tonight, sir. As I
But
said
you
at the
didn't- but you
outset,
did- but you
I'm
did-
not asking you to vote for it tonight.
No, I know, but you didn't bring the stuff, and we're wasting time. I mean, excuse me. We want to help you, we want to help our
I appreciate
the
your
abutters.
comments.
But it's talk, talk, talk. And that photograph, could you also show us one of a winter scene when the deciduous trees are gone, or at least the leaves have gone? What will they be seen even from the road during the winter, January, February, December, March? So,
Again, that's the issue Mr. Powers raised, why
in order
a
for,
wooden fence might be the better alternative.
The street address of this property is Blackmore Pond.
Yes, 33.
There's not an access from Blackmore Pond onto the property? You have to access through Squirrel Island?
Correct.
You're choosing to, or there's no way to create an access from Blackmore Pond? Do you have any frontage on Blackmore Pond Road?
The issue is that there's wetlands that we'd have to cross, and it's actually significant wetlands, and that's what provides the natural barrier between Blackmore Pond Road and the project. So there's just, there are actually significant wetlands both to the north and east and southeast sides.
And what makes this property optimal for this solar field? I mean, here's my general impression. We're clear-cutting property now in a section of town that has been relatively preserved for residential homes. These folks didn't build their homes in this area to look at an industrial setting. And I think this is what makes it different than a solar farm on Toby Road, which is surrounded by commerce and industrial. We're looking at a residential neighborhood right now, and what is making this the optimal site?
Well, when you say optimal site, you're looking at our development project approval standards. I mean, first of all, one of the main issues is availability. The second issue is zoning. And in this particular case, it's a site that became available to us. It's a site, when you review your local zoning bylaw, we're allowed to build the project if we meet certain criteria set for in that bylaw, which we've tried to do. So that's, I won't say it's the best site in town for a solar project. There are other sites that I might prefer, that you might prefer, but if they're not available.
What has your company done as far as studying the depreciation of properties when something like this is built in a residential area?
Our company has not done anything in and of itself. There have been publications made by government sources as well as private association sources that indicate there is no appreciable depreciation. It has been reviewed from the standpoint of other renewable energy sources, such as windmills.
So,
There has been no comprehensive study of the effect that a solar project will have on abutting property.
so, Mr. Chairman, this is one of my largest concerns and why I feel we need to tune up our bylaws here. I would think there is some depreciation of these properties. If not depreciation, no appreciation of value because of this being adjacent to these residential homes. So let's talk about the road itself. The road construction itself, the access of power to those homes in those neighborhoods. What I'm very concerned with here is emergency response down into this way here. Have you talked to the fire department? There should have been an established turnaround and plenty of clearance for emergency vehicles down here. Is that going to be accommodated for your facility there?
If you would like and don't have a letter for your file yet, I will get you a letter from
We have 2 letters.
first responders in addition to what you already have.
We've had several, sorry, Mr. Shanahan.
Go ahead.
I've had several meetings with Chris Smith, the Lieutenant Fire Inspector, and you have 2 letters in the file, one specific to access, the other for battery storage. So he has reviewed our plans several times, and he's made his comments in writing to the board.
But that actually describes accessing the roads, getting a proper turnaround on the other side?
Well, you could use this access as a turnaround, but so they have free access to get in and fully maneuver around this site. They'll have their Knox box, they'll get their training, and you know, it's certainly big enough if a truck wanted to pull in and do a 3-point turn, they could do that on this access drive, but it has been reviewed by the fire department.
Okay. Thank you.
As I began, Mr. Chairman, my impression coming in was visual impact, landscape screening was the issue. This gentleman's comments are heard well, and I understand he's not going to be a happy camper unless and until I address them for him, so we shall. If there are other comments beyond that, I'd like to spend the same time on those other issues, but if this is the issue and the abutter's perception is the issue, that's where my focus will be going forward.
I would like to echo my colleagues' comments about the concern for the degradation of the value of the neighbors' properties. I said this the last time, candidly, I would not consider buying a home in that area when this is built. So that's another concern. How you address that is between you and the neighbors, I don't know.
Well, it's a concern of your part as a member of the planning board. I'd like to address that to you. I can deal with the neighbors.
My
separately.
concern as a member of the planning board is to look out for the town's interests and the residents of the town's interests.
I'd respectfully suggest, sir, that when you look to your local bylaw, that tells me what I need to do and where I can do it in the town of Wareham. And your town has told me I can do it at this location. Now, once we do that, now we look at the standards in the bylaw in Chapter 40A, and am I adversely affecting the public health, safety, or welfare of your community? I'd respectfully suggest there's no evidence of that whatsoever. I am not responsible for enhancing the marketability of the value of abutting properties any more than anyone else who comes before you with the project is responsible to do that.
Noted.
You're gonna come back with, well, what he's looking for. Your representation in your computer-generated photos here are kind of deceiving. If I look at these and I thumb through it and I don't know the area, it seems like 90% of the vegetation is a foliage-type tree like birch. It doesn't represent what's actually out there. I think in your computer model, I think you can do a little bit better job of presentation there. You know, it's very deceiving, you know, especially in the last page. Looks like you're going on a nice dirt road with all birch trees, you know, well-leaved and everything else, and that's not the case out there.
Admittedly, they're desktop generated.
Some of the points regarding this plan that were brought up last time was the single line of arborvitae, that a more staggered approach to the screen might be better, in some way to offset the entrance so it isn't a direct shot in. And looking at your depiction, if it's possible to move the panels further east, as tight to that access road as possible, to be able to create more of a buffer on the Squirrel Island roadside.
Well, again, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Powers' suggestion of maybe doing something more attractive in the way of fencing and planting might better address that than staggering arborvitae.
That was, I was just bringing up the points from the previous meeting, so.
If I may, on the original plan, your berm ran down adjacent to Squirrel Island Road, but it doesn't make a corner and come across the lower perimeter to help shield for this residence down below. Why is that? Why wouldn't you make the turn and then put your plantings on that and give yourself that extra 6 or 7 foot head start on screening? He seems to be honest. Looking at your depictions and having visited the site myself, I agree. I think that elevation from his lot up the hill and then adding the height of the infrastructure on top of that, he's going to have a bird's eye view of that thing. Why not at least give him that berm and then the plantings on top of it and not have to wait 2 years if they grow at 3 feet a year? Give him a 2-year head start.
The goal is to get to 25-foot arborvitae. If you start on top of 5-foot berm, you don't have
Give him a head start, right.
I appreciate it.
Has your organization ever restored one of these projects?
Nope, I don't believe any of it.
What is the oldest project you have underway
From 2009, that was in Colorado.
in Colorado?
Mhm.
So we have bonds out there for restoration. I mean, in my, again, here's my mind working. For you to restore this now, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, how are you going to restore that? What does the plantings look like in there?
First of all, the restoration plan would be as much as reasonably possible in concert with the landowner and the town. Obviously, if I take 5 acres and I clear cut it and I leave in 25 years, I'm not gonna come back and replace those trees at that height. It's not gonna happen. So what we basically do is go in, and as is set forth in the decommissioning plan, we don't do it, a professional engineer sets forth the decommissioning plan, talks about how the panels are taken out and what is done. But being very transparent about the whole thing, if we left there in 10 years, we'd come in, we'd remove the project, we'd go back in, grade it, loam it, seed it, maybe put in some blueberries, maybe put in some shrubbery, but in the middle of what is there, it's not gonna get, quote, restored to its previous condition. It's obviously not gonna happen.
Also, has your firm studied the impact on wildlife? The last solar project that was in front of us, there was a lot of concerns with migration of deer, turkey around the bog areas. Now, there's bog areas very close by here as well. Have you actually done a wildlife study to see if this is going to impact migration of wildlife?
Now, we deal with the state reviews our plan, and they make a determination as to whether we're having an impact on endangered species and/or wildlife habitat.
And what has the state said about this project?
They've approved it.
No impact.
They've indicated we can go forward. I can provide that letter for you if you'd like.
Yeah, so I'd like to request a letter if we're going to have to revisit this. I have one other question, because I wasn't here the last meeting. Can you show me how the line comes into the actual solar field?
For the three-phase,
Yeah, 3-phase. Is it underground portion before surfaces?
Bob, can you better address that? Thank you.
Sure. So it's a combination of overhead and underground. So this is all on this sheet 4, this is all underground electric. It's a directional drilling from the upland side under the wetland, and the original plan had some overhead here, so it's all underground. The overhead portion is the 3 new poles adjacent to Ferry Hill Road. Because of the ownership of the pole issue, so we've got the existing poles on Squirrel Island Road that we can't use. We put a new intermediary pole. We've got 4 additional poles, 2 more. We go overhead on the current plan to this point. I believe in Mr. Rowley's letter and what the, this issue here with the easement, my interpretation is the board would prefer to have the jacking pit adjacent to Squirrel Island Road. And we believe Eversource would still want, the new Eversource controlled poles from Ferry Hill Road to the point where we hit the easement. So there is our ability to include a little bit more directional drilling. But unless the other parties sign off on the existing poles, you would have a number of new poles.
The other parties is,
Mr. Perry and
Nautilus Solar.
the firm that owns the existing solar now.
have you approached Eversource to take over responsibility for those poles?
There have been discussions between Eversource, Nautilus, and Mr. Perry, and there has not been a decision reached on that yet.
So, even though this is an unaccepted road, correct? It's a maintained road, but
Don't know the status.
it's a private way. Again, I got a real problem with telephone poles in this town. We have managed to line both sides of every road with telephone poles. And here again, we're having to move instead of coming up with a correct action here, We're installing more poles down this very narrow passageway here unnecessarily. You know, as far as maintenance goes of the actual power lines that go through, it seems far more, a far better approach to have Eversource maintaining those power feeds, both to this solar farm and to those homeowners down here, than having all of this private action taking place. So we don't have a community working together, is what I'm saying. And that's a little discouraging to me.
I understand your concern. My hometown, biggest problem since I was on the Board of Selectmen 25 years ago was utility poles. And what do we do to get things put underground? New subdivisions now require underground utilities, but the poles are not going away. When you say unnecessarily, that's a philosophical perception. I agree that there is a better way, but that doesn't mean for us it's unnecessary for us to do the project. It is necessary because we don't have an alternative. What Mr. Perry and Nautilus and Eversource discuss and agree upon is beyond our control, and quite honestly, they're not terribly interested in our input. That's out here. We're over here. So in a perfect world, I agree you wouldn't have utility poles going down each side of a public way throughout town. But on the other hand, you understand those utility poles are there for a purpose, and it's to serve the people within the community, and that's the way it's been done.
But those poles are not, those are private poles going down that street. So, and I do think that Eversource has a say in this equation because you're selling your power to Eversource, aren't you?
Not selling it to Eversource. We're a community shared project.
But you need Eversource to be the vehicle.
Yeah, we feed into their utility grid, that's correct.
Right. So I see Eversource as a player in this equation.
Well, if you think utilities are in favor of solar projects and accepting their production, you're viewing it from the wrong perspective, because if it was up to Eversource and Engrid, there'd be no solar projects, because they don't believe in solar power. So it's not like we could say to them, if you don't let us use your poles, we're not gonna do our project. They're gonna say, okay, see you. That's what happens.
35 feet, wouldn't it?
Well, what do you do with your power if Eversource doesn't buy it? Who is another buyer for your
We
power?
don't do the project. They don't buy it. They take it into their grid. We have a platform with them that allows our customers to get discounts on their monthly electric bill.
Okay.
Eversource lets us tie into their three-phase because Beacon Hill tells them they have to a certain amount of production. And believe me, once they see that cap in the production, they're very happy not to deal with us or anybody else after that.
Okay.
This is a public hearing, so if there's anyone that would like to address the board this evening?
My name is Eric Colentilla. I live at 15 Squirrel Island Road, lot number 2. This has been very enlightening with more information this evening here. I'd like to just start out with the first photograph, which they conveniently keep leaving off of all of their presentations of the solar field that's directly behind us, and their proposed one in the front of us. The residents here on Squirrel Island Road wish to thank the Planning Board for your concerted efforts to understand all involved parties' concerns and objectives. We appreciate a lot of the questioning that is going on. And we appreciate that several board members came to Squirrel Island Road a couple of weeks ago to see for themselves our homes and what we face if this project goes through. Our neighborhood meetings, which have been many, still bring up specific important issues and concerns pertaining to the proposed solar field project, which has already been brought up here tonight. Property values will go down in the toilet when you're talking about residents that are sandwiched in between two solar fields. Ownership of the utility poles has been brought up again. That is a major problem, and it's not just with this project. Future projects that are already on the board we've seen are going to be an issue. The poles is a major problem. They are involved with the poles, whether they admit it or not. The proposed minimum required 50-foot setback from Squirrel Island Road to the solar field fence is inadequate. Even with the proposed berm and all the trees, a solar field is visible from ground level and especially from the second floor windows facing the backyards and our front yards. We've done our own line of sight from the second floors with markers just to see. It's going to be visible. And we didn't even think about what happens in the winter when the leaves are gone. It's even going to be more so. Jerry Burrows and his wife, who live at the south end of the proposed solar field, will be looking up that hill and have the best view of virtually every solar panel. Even with the trees, we stood there and we looked. You're going to see through the tall trees that are already there. No berm is proposed to block their view, and there is that 35-foot elevation. They're going to be looking right up at this thing. The residents feel that a 150-foot setback would be the minimum acceptable from the actual surveyed borders for the road to be, when the road is to be widened, not the existing 14-foot dirt road. The wetland drainage has still not been discussed appropriately. We was talking about how the drainage from back the Nautilus field, where they're overflow, but where their ponds, catch ponds, overflow every rain, overfills my backyard, goes into lot number 3 next door, hits that culvert, swamps that road, blocks Paul's driveway. On the issue, I want to bring up this animal issue. I know it's conservation, but because they brought it up last time, on the issue of animal species and how they may be affected was brought up. The documents before you, if you take a look, and they state, this is a state document off the website, state document. Eastern rat snake, state status endangered, federal status none. They're using the federal status. They don't look at the state status. And so I don't know what he's talking about, the letter, but it is on all the websites. The next page, if you take a look, and we're just talking about a few that are official. Oh, there's a rat snake in the backyard. My backyard. The box turtle, which state status is of special concern. This is on official state Massachusetts website. The documents before you online from Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. It clearly states that these species are rated endangered and of concern on Squirrel Island Road. The last meeting, the solar company clearly stated there were no endangered species. As I said, they were probably referring to the federal status, but I don't know what letter he's referring to, but it does show state status is endangered. And the type of animals that are on that road, from everything from turkeys, fox, raccoons, fisher cats, snakes, osprey, hawks, that 6-inch little rise in the fence is just a minimal token. These are things that we've already addressed, but some of the new things we've discovered upon doing a little more research. I'd like to make a few important references from the document put out by the Department of Energy Resources, Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy Environmental Affairs, December 2014, Model for the Regulation of Solar Energy Systems. I know everybody's familiar with that, and I'm sure they're familiar with it too, and these are recommendations. They aren't law that has to be followed, but they are recommendations, and we feel they're important recommendations. It states, was prepared to assist Massachusetts cities and towns in establishing reasonable standards to facilitate development of solar energy systems. Communities will need to carefully consider how this language is to be modified and suit to the need of zoning and bylaws. On page 15, under site preferences, and these are very specific to Squirrel Island Road, where a solar facility is cited, as well as placement on the site once selected, is an important consideration, particularly in regard to large-scale ground-mounted facilities. Department of Environmental Resources strongly discourages locations that result in significant loss of land and natural resources, including farm and forest land, and encourages rooftop siting, as well as locations in industrial and commercial districts or on vacant, disturbed land. Significant tree cutting is problematic because important water management, cooling, and climatic benefits to trees that they provide. At the last meeting on August 13th, it was brought up that water runoff was a concern due to glacier till, where a sand base is better suited for solar fields. Also, an interesting question was asked as to what the beneficial trade-off between cutting down a forest of trees that provide that help remove carbon dioxide from the environment and provide clean, fresh oxygen to breathe versus installing a solar field of plastic, metal, and glass. At some point in the future, all this tree cutting is going to catch up to us and come to a tipping point. And again, over 5 acres of forest land will be cut, including a 20-foot easement road, wider than the existing 14-foot Squirrel Island Road. And as you come down Squirrel Island Road, you'll be faced with 2 roads running basically side by side with a view straight down to the solar field. On page 15 and 16 of this document, site plan review, design, and operation standards, utility connections. Reasonable efforts as determined by the Site Plan Review Authority shall be made to place all utility connections from the solar photovoltaic installation underground, depending on appropriate soil conditions, shape, and topography of the site and requirements of the utility provider. And of course, electrical transformers for utility interconnections may be above ground if required. A question would be, are the transformers on poles or are they on the ground? The trees on this property are virtually all well over 20 foot tall, as you've come down and seen. The wires on the poles on the 20-foot easement will not stand a chance when these trees on either side snap and take them down. As you can see from the other photo that I've placed here, for the winter, it shows that Doug here has photographed. This was this past winter when we had to bring down private trucks to take care of that because the owner of the road refused to take care of the situation, which again comes down to the poles and which comes down to condition of the road. Of importance here, on page 16, monitoring and maintenance. Solar energy systems installation conditions. Large-scale ground-mounted solar energy system owner or operator shall maintain a facility in good condition. Maintenance shall, but not limited to painting, structural repairs, integrity, security measures. Site access shall be maintained to level acceptable to the local fire chief, emergency management director, and emergency medical vehicles. Now, we heard that they've already talked to the fire chief, et cetera, and that will be addressed presently. But it also goes on to state the owner or operator shall be responsible for the cost of maintaining a solar energy system and any access, road or roads, unless accepted as a public way. Squirrel Island Road at the present is referred to as a private road, and this makes it an access road to the present and proposed solar field. Page 5, under overlay zoning districts. In addition, some communities may wish to conduct a feasibility analysis to determine where large-scale solar energy systems are most appropriate within the municipality and use an overlay zoning district approach to encourage the siting of facilities in the most feasible locations. Once an area has been established through a thorough and analytical process, the municipality could enact overlaying zoning legislation to prioritize these areas for large-scale solar systems. It clearly states to conduct a feasibility analysis to determine where large-scale solar energy systems are most appropriate and in the most feasible locations. So my question is, exactly how are these feasible locations decided on? Where acre upon acre of trees are cut down? What vacant lot has been used for any of these solar projects? What industrial locations were developed for any of these solar projects? What commercial districts have been developed for any of these solar projects? From our experience on Squirrel Island Road, the landowners have contacted the solar companies to put these in. And I did include a photo at the far end of Squirrel Island that I mentioned at the last meeting, that major sand pit that exists, if you're interested in looking for a site that's more appropriate. At the planning board meeting on August 13th, it was recommended by a selectman that there should be a moratorium on solar fields until further study is conducted. It was also stated by many people that it's just in the wrong place. Several of you have come down the road a couple weeks ago and saw for yourselves our beautiful homes and the acres of forested land that would be cut down. Now, bond issues, the Nautilus, I remember going to that meeting. They have a bond. They did the same thing. They said the same thing about care and everything. Responsibility of the owners. They're stating, and we appreciate all of the things they're going to take care of in years to come. We heard the same thing at that other meeting. But how many owners are going to end up taking care of this? How many owners before Nautilus took over? You folks were involved in that at one point. The same things were stated. And now Nautilus has it, and it looks like it does, and there's major problems there. So there's responsibility of ownership. And the neighbors, you know, I would like to just, you know, save your breath. You can talk about the berms, the fences, the trees, anything you want. But we're sandwiched between two solar fields. Our property values will be in the toilet. And if you aren't willing to live in a house on that street, you shouldn't let this plan go through. And I know none of yous would want to live there. That's the crux of this. There's another solar field there. And why in God's name you would even propose such a project with one right next door, and you ignore saying anything about that or showing any images of that? You're in the wrong place, gentlemen. Save your time and your breath. We don't want to hear about all these other concessions. You're in the wrong place. Thank you.
I think that where all the telephone poles are now down at the end of the road, they've all been put on Mr. Ahern's property already. So in my view, he's already tied into Nautilus, which is at the first field, because he allowed them to put their power feeds on their triangle at the end of the road already. So it is connected. They're all connected. They all know each other. They're all working with each other. Between Mr. Perry represented Mr. Ahern, giving these people easements and giving them pieces of property here, they're all working together. The landowners, Nautilus, and these folks coming in, they're gonna have to connect up into the same triangle where these poles are now. So they're connected. So why would Mr. Ahern let Nautilus put poles on his property? Unless he didn't plan on a long time ago putting something in here and connecting up. So they're all connecting into the same common coupling point right at the end of the road, where he's gonna put more poles and stick them on his land here, but they're all gonna tie into Eversource on Mr. Ahern's land. So he is tied in with Eversource. And until we get these poles turned over somehow so that we have public utility service on our road with our telephone poles, you folks gotta put a moratorium on anything that gets put in. I don't care if it's houses, I don't care if it's another solar farm. There just can't be anything else put on this road until it addresses the concerns of the people that are already on this road. I mean, we have major problems on this road. The road's gotta be widened. And we just got a letter in the mail the other day that they're already proposing at the zoning board Wednesday night to stick a house on the property, right where this circle is in the upland. So why are they trying to put a house on this property and get zoning approved before a non-conforming lot? Are they gonna put a house here and bring poles through the property? If this house goes in, how are they gonna tie into the property? If trees come down and take the wires out at this crossing point here, now I gotta deal with these people, Mr. Ahern, Mr. Perry, and Nautilus. If a tree comes down at this crossing point, I gotta deal with 4 private pole owners and landowners to get my power back on, because I can't call Eversource, they won't come down my road. They've told us, and they've sat at the end of our road and watched me cut trees and me clear the lines, because the landowners don't do it. In the plans, it says that the solar farm people should be maintaining the road. as Eric just talked about, and nobody maintains the road. I maintain it. I call my buddy Mark, and he comes down with his little tractor and drags something behind it. The landowners don't. I do. I've been breaking my back for 10 years shoveling stone in all the potholes. I can't do it anymore. My back hurts. So if these folks are gonna widen this road or whatever they're gonna do, and now they're gonna bring another solar farm down here, they better be maintaining it after every rainstorm, and nobody does. So there's too many outstanding issues to allow, I don't care if it's 2 new houses, 3 new houses, 4 new houses, or a solar farm, that need to be resolved before this board decides to let anything else go in on this road. And I respectfully ask the board to stop any building on this road until all of our needs are addressed. We pay $4 grand or more a year per house of taxes on this road, and we get no public services, and I think we should. And I think that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you for listening to us.
Good evening, Kevin Mahalik, 163 Squirrel Island Road. If I could pass out some pictures to the board.
Thank you.
My property, 163 Squirrel Island Road, is located at parcel 1003. I'm at the very last one at the very end of Squirrel Island Road. The road takes a sharp right-hand bend. Sorry, gentlemen.
Where are you?
1003 here.
Where's the
The
field?
proposed field is going to be up here on the top right-hand corner.
Can you
of
locate
sheet
this here?
73. Yep. So it would be this type of positioning. Coming down the road, I'm down here on the right. Yep, it would be that type of an orientation right there. So the road continues down. It dead ends at the very bottom. The road that you see going off to the right-hand side is non-existing. For whatever reason, it still shows on town books, but is not there. My lot, 1003, as you can see, it shows that the road continues through my property and comes around. It does not continue past my property as shown on the map there. Unfortunately, when the new construction homes were made, it was unaware to me when I bought my property. It's not included on the deed, and it was unbeknownst to anyone, but it was considered that my U-shaped driveway that comes in and exits at a separate exit was the cul-de-sac proposed for these new construction homes. So the health and safety issue that we have going on here is, I mean, I can't believe that it's gone on this long. We don't have a way for a fire truck to come down and turn around. We don't have a way for an ambulance to come down and turn around. One of our neighbors had a back issue. An emergency vehicle had to tell him that he had to remain in a seated position, and they would help assist him as they bumped over the potholes coming out of our road because they couldn't lay him down on a stretcher to transport him properly. We have huge issues that need to be addressed before any of these things, I feel, should be, even considered. The solar farm that's currently there behind all of their homes, it was proposed that all of these things would be maintained. It has now seen many different ownerships, and nothing has been done for the maintenance of that, for the access road coming to their facility or for their actual facility. There's a gate there that had a tree fall down on it and has been left broken. My other neighbor that spoke at our last meeting here, he has been in charge of clearing the trees that have fallen on their access road to what is now the Nautilus Solar Farm that was once owned by CEC. None of these things have been maintained. So I'd like to note that the proposed things may sound good, but the actual we've seen, and it's right in our backyards, and it's not what has been discussed. The road issues that exist right now, their proposed setbacks are set from some of the lines that are seen on your maps. But you can see that there's a line that's what was considered the road for the approval of the new construction homes, and then what the actual existing is. In much of the road, there's not enough room for 2 cars to pass without one car pulling up into the woods to allow the other to pass by it. With that, as well as the issue of fire and medical emergency vehicles being able to access it. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. Another issue that's become very apparent is the issue of the hydrology and water issues. From the existing solar farm, I couldn't understand for the longest time why I had an increase in flooding in my basement. My sump pump continuously ran until I realized that the drainage ponds and the way that they structured the Nautilus solar farm that's existing to have their catch basins and the water flow there is not adequate. My property, being the lowest lying one in the whole neighborhood, ends up with it all in my water table and in my basement. So now it's created a whole new set of issues for myself and, constant flooding. So I would like that to be something taken into consideration. Also with the endangered and protected species. I have box turtles that I see all the time in my yard, as well as the rat snakes that you have in your packet there, as well as bald eagles, all of which are endangered, protected, selected species that, are of attention. The box turtle especially lives in a wooded environment. With this proposal to cut down 5 acres of forested land and wooded environment, this animal is not going to be happy living on a solar farm. These have been around, well before us and our homes being there, and they coexist with our homes. But it's not going to be coexisting with a solar farm. I would like that to be taken into consideration. It is a state endangered animal. Also, with the recommendations and guidelines put forth on the state's proposal that has been read, it clearly recommends that a lot of other site selection things be considered before deforestation. We have 5 acres of forested land that's going to be cut down. It's already been done in the backyard of all of these residents, and it's not sensible. It doesn't make any sense. The other thing that I'd like to speak to is that West Bridgewater, it was brought up at one of the other planning board meetings, West Bridgewater put forth with their planning and zoning that solar is a manufacturing and industrial process. You're creating electricity. Their decision was that this needs to be under a different zoning rather than the R60 residential. We've seen in our housing area and in our neighborhood that the one proposed project that was in place, or that has been put in place, we all had ideas that this would be, an all right thing. And it's turned out to be the exact opposite. And now with them proposing to cut down all of the woods across the street and change the entire dynamic of where we live, it really creates a huge issue. We all bought homes because we enjoyed the environment in which these homes were set. And the proposed solar farm would be a huge change to where we live. I would ask that the board take into consideration what West Bridgewater has done in determining that solar farms are an industrial and manufacturing facility, and that the zoning be required for such a determination. Thank you very much for hearing my concerns. Also, if I could just speak to the fact, a question that I have. My home and my land being determined as the cul-de-sac for the neighborhood, what process would I go through to remedy that? I mean, because clearly, my land is not part of the road.
I don't know, without the particulars, I don't know why that would be labeled a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, and I've been through numerous boards at the town hall. Nobody really seems to have an idea or a reason. So if you guys have any suggestions.
Neighbors may just be using it that way. I mean,
Well, it's been accepted on the town maps. So just a question that I have, how do I remedy that?
I would suggest you talk to legal counsel.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the hour is late, we might just address a couple of issues that have been raised, just very briefly. First, because the first gentleman and then this gentleman subsequently referring to the DOER solar model and the recommendations set forth. It should be clear to this board that those are not recommendations to the planning board in how to consider an application. That DOER recommended model is if a municipality is looking to develop a solar bylaw, as your municipality did, these are certain items that you may want to look at in developing your solar bylaw. So I would point out that while all of what he read is accurate as printed in 2014, they aren't recommendations to you or any other regulatory authority in reviewing a solar project. If your study committee that reviewed and adopted your solar bylaw had those recommendations and it adopted those recommendations as part of the law that I'm here under, then all of that's relevant. But it is not relevant when you have a solar bylaw that didn't adopt the recommendations or the suggestions, number one. Number two, I want to make it clear, as the board I'm sure is aware, and the neighbors should be aware, if the community adopted a bylaw at this point, whether it's a solar bylaw or a development bylaw, it would be inapplicable to this project because we're already into this process and you can't adopt a moratorium retroactively. A couple of other points. All of the issues about the private road, Mr. Powers out breaking his back, filling potholes with gravel, etc. I didn't buy a house on a private road. I didn't buy a house on a road that the town hadn't accepted and doesn't maintain. I understand his dilemma. I understand his emotional concern about it. But that is not something I caused, nor am I going to make it any worse. They chose to buy properties on a private road, and therefore they took on certain responsibilities in connection with living on that private road. Similarly, people who buy homes on streets with private utility poles that they don't control, that isn't my fault. If that was a concern when the house was being considered and the title was being reviewed before purchase, that's when those matters should have been addressed and resolved. I cannot address and resolve those problems for these folks now. And whether or not my project gets approved is going to have no impact on whether they get it resolved. That is not for us to do, nor is it within our power to do. So I think that's very important. The other two things that were raised with some emotion with regard to emergency response vehicles, under your bylaw, we have certain obligations to go through before we come here, and one of which is to deal with your fire department. And as Mr. Rogers indicated, we've met with the fire department. They've reviewed the plans, and they've issued a letter to the planning board indicating they're okay with it. There's nothing more I can do than go to the agency of appropriate jurisdiction, ask them to review the plans and tell me what, if anything, I need to do to change them. It's not required. And last of all, this gentleman was incorrect. I'm certain not intentionally incorrect, but we did not look to the federal guidelines with regard to wildlife habitat and endangered species. We looked at the state agency. And we have a letter indicating that this site can be built upon, and I'll provide that to this board. There's no sense arguing back and forth over who did what. I'll provide a document that evidences that fact. With that, I will go out, fulfill the commitments I made this evening, and with your permission, ask that we put on the agenda for your next meeting.
Next meeting?
Can I have just a comment again? In a crux, in a nutshell.
Excuse me, would you sit and talk on the mic, please, and address the board?
You can have a seat, too. In the beginning, if this project, you say that you're into this far, and I brought it up the last meeting, you're into it far. You spent a lot of money on this, a lot of people, a lot of invested.
You're correct, but I never raised that. That's not
No, you didn't. It was brought up at the last meeting. I brought this up, and I know what you invested into this. But why, in God's name, if you're concerned about where you put these things that are residents, why weren't we involved in the very beginning, before you went through all this? Just put forth a simple proposal. We were thinking about putting in this solar field that might be in this area right here. We would have been through all these discussions then before you invested many times and a lot of money into this project.
Only if
And I
we went away.
and let me, I
Excuse
resent.
me, let's not have a debate here, let's
No,
make
but
your point.
at the same time, you're throwing all of this now back, and it's our fault because we bought properties and didn't know this about this and this and this. Well, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. And as far as the species go, there are documents, state documents that show they are endangered. You have a letter, I have information too.
Excuse me. Yes, sir.
May I address the board with one other concern? You're not concerned, but just a point. Sir, it's my understanding that the solar field that's now owned by Nautilus...
Once again, address the board,
I'm sorry.
please.
Kevin Mahalik, 163 Squirrel Island Road. Am I correct in understanding that CEC was a prior owner of the Nautilus solar farm?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, with the plans proposed with that solar farm project that's in place currently, it was said that an access road to that solar farm, if a private road, would be maintained. Is that correct?
I believe you're correct. I don't
Okay. There has never been anything done from either CEC or Nautilus or any of the companies involved to maintain that section of road from where it starts on Squirrel Island Road to their access point. And it's continuously deteriorated since the inception of this progress, or this project. So I would just like it to be noted that that has not been the case, and I wouldn't expect anything different with a proposed project.
I would just suggest to you, if I may, through the chair, that when we owned that project, we were in complete compliance with our permitting and our commitments to the town of Wareham. If there has been a slack since that time, I can't take responsibility. I feel bad about it. When we sold the project to Nautilus, it would be the equivalent of you taking care of your yard and your house and selling it to someone else, and your next door neighbor coming and say, since you sold it to that guy, he doesn't cut the lawn and he doesn't paint the woodwork.
Sir, I understand your point of view on that, but we're left with the problem once you sell your project off to the next person.
I understand that.
And there were issues from the construction timeline starting. The road deteriorated from the vehicles traveling over it, from all the work that was being done. And then when things were in place, it was sold, and all of a sudden it's not your problem. It's just not right. I mean, you say that you want to be a good neighbor. You're clearly not showing the good faith in that.
I said I'd love to work with the neighbors and be a good neighbor. It doesn't sound like it's
Well,
going to be a two-way street.
You had the chance one time. I would just like that to be noted. Thank you.
At what point did you sell that? Did you sell it as a completed project or during construction?
I think it was a completed project.
It was powered. It was up and running.
So if there's no further comments, we're looking to continue to, what's the date?
September 24th, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rogers, the number 5 acres, does it refer to the actual footprint of the panels?
It's, I think it's 5.5 acres within the security fence, so it does not include the 20-foot easement. It's the
So
project proper.
how much land would be cleared?
Well, that's the 5.5 acres, well, plus.
Plus,
Well, if we aren't told to directional drill more, you know, there's some tree clearing in the, still proposed in the 20-foot
looking at 6
easement.
acres possibly, right?
So that's probably a good number, Emmanuel, thank you.
Thanks.
for a motion to continue?
Entertain a motion to continue to September 27th, 24th,
At 7.
7 o'clock.
Is that a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
Let's see. This,
Oh, it's the other gentleman behind you. I was asking to see, sorry. That's okay. You're asking about that loop road right there? Yeah. These go back to the assessors maps when they were done in the 1860s and when they were existing.
discussion of the zoning articles. Can we do that outside the public hearing, or you just want to?
Just wanted to identify, this is not a public hearing. Just wanted to identify the
My feeling is.
articles that were submitted in time for the
Why are we delaying this? What do you think?
deadline for the fall town meeting.
Mine too. So why are we there wasting their money? Was it recorded that I abstained on the vote? I abstained on the vote
On the articles?
to continue the meeting.
Oh,
It's gonna bring you some nice pictures.
Hmm?
It's gonna bring you some nice pictures.
Yeah.
for the record,
Good
the
pickup.
vote
You're right on the
on
money.
continuance of the public hearing was 401. Enclosing your packet is the articles as submitted to the Board of Selectmen for placing on the town meeting warrant.
I got a question before you go too far, George. What relationship to the zoning bylaws does our garage plans?
The garage graphics are for informational purposes for the article that has to deal with accessory buildings.
If you look on the back of the first page, excuse me.
The articles that were submitted are to amend Article 5, the supplemental regulations on the definitions of ungaraged motor vehicles and outdoor storage. Second article submitted was for amending the zoning bylaw for density and dimensional regulations, including accessory buildings and existing small lots. And there was an article that was submitted at the request of the chairman of the Board of Selectmen on signs, Article 11. These are all articles that are being advertised for public hearing. And there's a placeholder article for the Tremont Nail Factory as well. So at this time, as far as I know, we have 4 articles that the planning board will be reporting on to town meeting.
We got changes to the sign bylaw. Where'd that come from?
That came from the chairman of the Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen also put in the violations and penalties.
Excuse me?
We'll put in the one for violations and penalties. I believe that's section 1119. Nope, that's signs.
1122.
1122 and 1133. That's all the selectmen?
Yeah. I prepared this at his direction.
Required to have a public hearing on this before it goes?
Yes, you will. You have public hearings scheduled for September 24th and October 15th.
Specifically on the signs, because we've already covered the public hearing on the other articles, right?
No, I think this is bullshit.
No, we'll be conducting a new one because those were altered from their original.
So they're putting a legal tax on you. I think we're gonna have a Boston Tea Party here, Ken. On 1122, the way I interpret it anyway. So in other words, if they find me in violation, I got 2 unregistered cars or whatever the violation is, now they're gonna tax me on a tax because I have a violation? That was the selectmen's idea?
Yes. And this has to do with signs, not for other violations. Specifically on a sign violation.
Don't know. Is it actually,
Yeah, the 1122 has to deal with the violations of the sign bylaw. It's not a general.
mm-hmm.
But that's a good question because taken out of context, it appears to be for any violation.
Mm-hmm.
You get somebody to do some speed reading, you know, they pick up a bulleted item. You know, it doesn't really point you that you're talking about the signed bylaw. It's just talking about a penalty in general.
Yep, I hear you.
So if you put your yard sale sign on a pole, it could cost you $250.
Directly to your tax bill.
Yeah.
So is there a vehicle for contesting?
An appeal process?
Yeah.
Yeah, anything done under zoning can be appealed to the Board of Appeals or to the courts.
I don't know if I like the idea of it being attached to the tax bill. I mean, if you've got a violation, I mean, it'd be no different than a speeding ticket. If you've got a violation and you're found to be duly in violation and you owe the penalty, it should be a standalone bill, whatever you want to call it. I don't know about attaching it to somebody's property tax bill. Now that puts their house in jeopardy over a sign violation. It seems a little bit draconian to me.
They do that, and then yet solar guys can come and cut all the trees down, kill all the turtles, and get away with it, right? Because the bylaw says it's something different. We're going in a bad direction here.
Amazing what we focus on.
Charlie, you can't leave yet.
He's done.
Well, don't put any posters on us, telephone poles on Squirrel Island Road, those are all private. You'd really be in trouble.
Who's the owner of that? Who's the owner of that?
There's a couple other people in there too. Majority.
And he was the landowner for the existing solar farm?
Was in relationship to his lot.
It's a lot further up the hill.
It's way up.
Is this an old cul-de-sac from Rhode Island Estates?
No, got nothing to do with Squirrel Island Estates. That's part of the old Pageant days. Remember the lady you called the cat lady? Lady had about 300 cats on there. She used to live there before. This is just how it sits right here. Squirrel Island Road goes down. Take this hard right. Then you go in the Whitehead Sand Pit, and of course that's all dead-ended now. Because they go down there, you can't go because it's all blocked off. You just turn around this driveway and come back out. Russo has rights on that road. Bob Perry says he owns Squirrel Island Road. He owns the upper portion. When Russo came and we approved the subdivision, they said, we asked him about, you got rights on that road. It used to be the old road for the trucks going out.
I'm going to pass this to the members, and you're CC'd on it, so if you're leaving, you may as well take your
So
copy.
everything was approved. Construction didn't
This
come
is
out
new,
Squirrel Island
this is
Road.
the final, I revised it, and I had made a mistake.
And then when they sued him, and they went down in the back room, they made a deal to get him a fat
Made a
check.
mistake. This is 8 feet, not 4. On the 50-foot wide
Rhode
road.
Island Road in its entirety.
Just,
No, he
I
owns
told
the
you
upper
4, I
portion.
think. And then I revised it, I added the
Correct.
He
drawing.
owns property on the side of
Did,
the road.
did you want to continue the hearing? I mean, the
Copy
meeting?
on it, so is it
Yeah,
appropriate to give it to you?
Is the redevelopment authority going to be ready for the
I'm gonna call you
24th
about-
also?
I've been reading this.
No, they're scheduled for the October 15th.
Maybe it's not the right time.
So the,
There's more in here.
I did get requirements for street acceptance.
Since he bought that land, he's been-
these are advertised for the 24th?
Right.
They appear to be correct with respect to
This is similar, this is, I copied your letter. Okay, good.
That's not it, is it?
No, this is your letter,
Right.
of the 15th of December. It is eight.
State.
Okay.
He bought the bogs, where it's St. Pitt's over here. So Bob Perry owned, his line's something here, goes across here. Did some transfer, some land, and he's part of the LLC if he doesn't.
And October 15th,
Curious if he was.
start to write something there.
He's part of the LLC.
Yeah, we're going to do a special meeting then.
Oh, marijuana, start to write marijuana.
Personally, I don't like it.
It should be underground all the way up to.
Say it's a horrible location.
Sure it is. You've been down there.
They keep talking about these folks here and the impact on
These two
them.
guys,
This
that's
one,
Barton says nothing. He's got all his Delaware equipment over here. And he owned all of this here, big portion. He sold all these people the houses. He hasn't been here yet.
What else we got?
He's just looking at the
it.
town, but he gets 80 years on this one, yeah.
Invitation to 35 Rosebrook reception? What's 35 Rosebrook?
35 Rosebrook is the new apartment building.
Oh,
that was the question
The
that I asked.
planning board has been invited to,
that's yours.
These people are,
Are they gonna leave it that
This
great
is Abbey Glass. This is the guy on top of the hill. This guy here sees it from the upper view. This guy here sees it from the lower view. And them trees are so tall. 25, 30 foot Abbey Buddies, you're gonna see right between it.
you can go to the
well, when I,
the open
when they
house.
were
if you want.
standing, the elevation just is a 20, 25 foot.
How are we gonna
I think
address
it's
these
more than
bylaws
Well,
on
then you've got
solar
up
farms?
to according to the plan.
We need to
you've got up to
propose
of,
at this town
Handle
meeting,
construction.
some type of study or
now you're talking, say, 30,
funding on
35
this.
feet plus.
I
Oh, I
do
don't
like
think-
this.
I don't think there's anything we can do at this town meeting. We could come back in the spring with fine tune the solar article.
When they were gonna subdivide all this land here, there was too much wetland. They
Think
didn't
you
do
could
anything with it.
Probably come up with a reforestation article, that if they're gonna cut down 5 acres, they gotta provide 5 acres
Money
somewhere
on
else.
this one, he said it's a good way to make a killing, so he got. in with
Yeah,
other
see, I
people,
think that's a
got
perfect
some
application
pieces
for
in
that
there,
land bank.
Put it together as a package and dump it.
Oh,
But
interesting.
cheaper with that,
I
'cause they
like
couldn't
this,
get the money.
this West Bridgewater actual definition of considering this
Last time they were here.
actual
that
manufacturing.
landfill was here, You guys beat
I
them up
think,
too bad.
I think
why
that's
such
a
big
ru-
gun in
I
it.
noticed that.
interpretation.
As an industrial.
The guy that was here
Yeah.
last time.
The only problem with that, Toby Road's a perfect
This guy's a
example.
closer.
They took industrial land that was set aside to provide jobs and industry
One of his old boss off
and
County
made it
Road in Rochester.
useless.
First thing he told him, Bob Perry's his consultant back and
It's,
forth.
I,
Bob knows every root
And I'll
cause
say
there is.
useless to any tree hugger that's out there.
So, got 6-acre bogs.
I don't know how many solar panels you have to
It's a gravel
have
pit
to
bog,
out
so
to
it's-
cancel out Mount
Can't see from
Kilauea.
the road.
well, I mean, the good news,
Underground from
I
here all
guess
the way to
this
County
time of
Road,
year,
every
I would,
underground right down to Service Road.
I don't see there's a great
I see no
loss pushing
problem.
off to the spring, because they
Because if you
probably won't be
realize
able to do any
Bob told him,
construction
you
of new.
realize the tax rate's gonna change, because now
farms.
it's industrial versus
But
agricultural.
The
So
folks that
whether
did the
it's
study on
possible,
the
they pay
master plan
taxes.
for the town,
In fact, California
they
back
help
and
us
forth
do a
and
recommended study on solar panel bylaws.
Sure, we could ask them.
Mr. Chairman, before
Costas.
we adjourn, I need to pass something out when you get a chance. Just keep
Sure.
it in mind.
But we could look at the solar bylaw again. By the way, I think the solar bylaw, it has lots of opportunity for the planning board, for the town to make discretionary judgments on the quality of the project.
The town's been in the solar business now 6 years, 7 years, they've been putting them in. And I think if we look at it this way as a learning process, we've learned a lot in the last 5 years. We've seen the ones in ADM properties, they're all in open space out in the woods, you can't see them, or, you know, pretty remote. And it seems like now, as time goes on, they're getting worse and worse. We had the one in County Road, wasn't bad, it's in the sand pit. The first one on Squirrel Island Road was a disaster. We've learned something, we should learn something from it. This one here is gonna be worse. The one on
Well-
Halfway Road almost almost half bad. That was
The,
touch and go for a
Well,
while.
the previous one on Squirrel Island Road, the one that's, seems to have gone to hell now, looked like a good place to put it. It was already deforested land, a former sand
Yep,
pit.
yep.
It was out behind everybody where nobody would see it.
It is their intent to sell this one once they get it put together?
They
Probably.
won't tell you
Well, that's the key thing that I wanted to recommend was, if they're going to sell it, just like a liquor license,
They don't have to tell you.
well, but our bylaw should say they will have to come, the new owners have to come back in front of us to make sure they uphold the conditions of the original approval.
Well, the,
Yeah. All conditions should transfer with ownership.
yeah, the condition should be on the filing, should be on the,
You know, but how do those conditions transfer with that ownership?
Because they run with the land itself.
yeah.
Then what's happened to a Squirrel
it's fu-
Island Road now?
It's an enforcement issue.
Permit is.
It's an
put on
enforcement
that.
issue.
They're gonna attach your tax for putting a sign on the damn telephone pole. And this guy here, you give him conditions and they don't live by them, and there's nothing you can do. You know, something's wrong with this picture.
There's been a constant battle to get enforcement on, and not just now, going back
Oh, you're way
years,
back,
getting
sure,
site
sure.
plan
Can I pass this out now?
conditions executed.
20,
Is it just a manpower issue?
Is it a good time?
no, 20 years ago, we asked for we put conditions on plans, on subdivisions or whatever, and of course, they were never enforced. We tried getting the building inspector to come to our meetings, says, we need some help, they would never show up. Never see them, nothing got enforced. Good example is, it was before you, is the daycare center on Sandwich Road. They came in here and begged us to get an OP, give them a 6-month extension to come back and put their, the landscaping in. Still to this day, they haven't planted a tree. There's not even a sign in the front. She's operating and running because they'll bullshit you whatever you wanna hear to get what they need to get the permit signed, and they go about their business. Do what you wanna do and catch me if you can. I'm gonna attach my taxes, because I put a sign on the telephone pole or a sign. Something's wrong.
How does the bond transfer with ownership, though?
Pardon?
How will the bond, in the case of the first solar project on Squirrel Island Road, the bond, how does that transfer? What happens to the bond when it changes ownership? That would have to come back to us. The original owner's not gonna hold that bond.
That is something that could fall through the cracks.
Good one. Talking about falling through the cracks. Now we're talking history. County Road. Was it Win Hill? Subdivision was approved. They were supposed to bring town water down Paving Mill Road, down County Road to this subdivision. It went defunct, it got reprocessed through somebody else, changed hands, they built it. Everybody got artesian wells. Ladies in town meeting floor, well, my water tax is going up. Water tax? She said, yeah, I pay a water tax. She doesn't have town water, she got an artesian well. They never put the water down the road. Fell between the cracks. 7 years.
You reimburse her?
No.
They finally got it reversed, and then they got absorbed by the district anyway.
I just handed out for your consideration a memo regarding my recommendation that we revise the reading of the definition of building height. And at our last meeting, it was correctly pointed out to check to see if it would be consistent with the code, with the state code. The state code relies on the International Building Code and on the International Residential Code. And the definition of building height in those, is this the right time? Or do you want to read it and talk about it next week?
Go right ahead.
You can see that it's in here that the vertical distance from grade plane to the average height of the highest roof surface. It's not very clear, but the implication is, and what I infer, is that a surface can be slanted, and therefore it's the height at the midpoint. And then the third page I show you is, I just took a block that's a 50-foot building, theoretically, 50 feet by 50 feet footprint with an 8 and 12 pitch roof on it. First of all, the flat building obviously is what it is at 35 feet. And if one wants to create a building which has more historic character or is consistent with the more traditional architecture, placing the midpoint of the pitch at the 35-foot line, this just shows you that in a 50-foot wide gable end, the increase in height of the pitch is like 8 feet, but that's because it's 50 feet wide. If we don't do that, if we maintain the line, the definition at 35 feet, the drawings C and D show you what happens. So my recommendation is consider it, think about it, quiz me. I'm going to have Charlie check my geometry. I think it's accurate. But I offer it for your consideration that we change by the way, the recommendation is very similar to what it was in the code before it was changed 2 years ago.
Is the 2015 edition the current level of acceptance by Massachusetts?
Yes. You mean
The
Latest
2015 edition is the currently
no,
accepted?
the operative state code is the 9th edition of the Massachusetts State Code, which relies on the 2015 edition of the International Residential Code and the International Building Code. And both codes, it's verbatim, the same definition.
That's the Massachusetts building code. That should be the definition. Anything else, Ken?
No?
We gotta come up with something. We got 45 more minutes to talk.
Entertain a motion to adjourn?
I would. 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll second that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned at, was that 9:13?